All right, so I get to talk a lot about authoritative parenting, and a parent had left this question on my Substack chat about authoritative parenting. This mom says, my 6-year-old wants to be in charge, and we have let her. We break down and allow bad habits because it's easier for us and her 3-year-old brother. But now her brother is starting to pick up on her habits. She tantrums about going to school, coming home from school, treats, new toys, iPad time, leaving or going to anything and all food. We started introducing both timeouts, mealtime at the table, only when we offer, and 30 minutes daily limit on iPad away from food. She has separation anxiety and ADHD. She sees a therapist but is not on medication. How much of this is nature versus nurture? And so this is a extremely common scenario that we run into, not just with children with separation anxiety or with ADHD, but in general. People like to be in control, and kids like to be in control. And when you give them control, they like to have more and more and more control. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't give our child control in some areas. And I actually, as I talk through what I think how this mom should approach this, I'm going to suggest that we give this child some specific areas of control where she has control, because control works great. Now, when I think about helping a child, I went to YMCA camps as a child. I actually worked as a camp counselor. That's where I met my wife. The YMCA, the camp thing is spirit, mind, and body. And so I kind of try and focus on those 3 areas because I do feel like we need to hit all of those different areas. Now, when I talk about spirit and when I talk about preparing the spirit, I'm not talking about it in a religious sense. I'm talking it more from a sense of self, a self-confidence, that sort of sense. You can apply a spiritual realm to it too, like a religious spiritual realm if you like. But I think preparing the spirit for the child is really important in these cases. And what that looks like is things like free play, things like lower demands. And so before we're going to try and like rein this in or decide, is this nature, is this just her nature, or is this nurture the way that we're approaching her, I'm going to start with some basics to make sure that we are hitting these different blocks, like these different blocks that we can stack on top of each other to see an improvement. So things like free play, things like lower demands, especially after school. Low demands, free play is extremely important. And especially if we're coming home from school or if we have too many evening activities, we're gonna pare down our evening activities to maybe just 1 or 2 nights per week so that we have time for free play, we have time for low demands, we have time for this child to have some control over what they're doing. The second building block, which fits with both spirit, mind, and body, is sleep. Getting good sleep is so important, and it's such a critical foundation that with this parent, I would tell them before you try and focus on like reining in her desire for control or setting limits or mealtime at the table or 30 minutes of iPad, like those are all very reasonable things to do. I would focus first and foremost on making sure that she's getting good rest, which looks like at least an hour before bed, no more screens. And we have a specific wind down plan. And a lot of parents run and run and run in the evenings and feel like they've got to pack in all these activities for enrichment and curriculum and all these sorts of things. And what it does is, okay, we got to get home, we got to get to bed, you got to go to sleep. And what that does to the child is it does not give them a sense of control, and it doesn't give them the time that they need to off ramp. Parents are so exhausted, they can fall asleep on a dime, but children are not that exhausted, obviously, and oftentimes they're overtired, and it makes it hard for their brain and their body to calm down. Now, when it comes to the biology side of things, I really focus on making sure that our brain is well equipped to handle the demands that are placed upon us, which looks like having adequate stores of neurotransmitters like dopamine, like serotonin, like norepinephrine, like all the other neurotransmitters that are required. Neurotransmitters synthesized from protein. So I make sure that at each meal of the day, especially first thing in the morning and after school, we're getting a good source of protein in. And so these are still like the basic building blocks that we're talking about before we moving into anything more about like how to actually approach this child. But if we don't have those building blocks in place, it's going to be really hard to make progress. We're going to spin our wheels. We're going to feel like either we're broken and we're not doing something right, or our child is broken, or we need to approach it a different way when we haven't addressed those like very basic biological foundations for both the spirit, the mind, and the body. Once you've done those things, then I would focus on giving some areas of control and reining in others. Now, we can't fix everything across the board all at once. We have to pick and choose. And so I usually have people start with different times of day when it comes to What am I going to do at this time of day? What am I going to do at this time of day? What am I going to do at this time of day? The main areas are first things in the mornings, which can be really stressful, after school to dinner time, and then from dinner time to bedtime. Those are like the three big areas. Pick one of those areas and focus in there on making things better. And so it sounds to me like a lot of these questions and concerns relate to that after school evening time period. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stop and we're going to be intentional about some areas of control and some areas of responsibility. You're going to start with one new boundary. So the boundary that you might pick is only 30 minutes of iPad time per day, which I think is a very reasonable boundary. And I don't know how for this mom that it's actually rolling that out. Although from the way that she phrased the rest of the question, I have a feeling that it's not going very well. But I think that screens are a really good place to start when it comes to boundaries. One of the criteria that I use for are we in a good place with our screens is not how much time or what specific things are on the screens. It's how does it go transitioning off screens. If we can transition off screens easily and then move on with play or dinner or whatever it might be, then we're in typically a good place when it comes to our approach to screens. If it's a meltdown, if it's a lot of struggle, if it is throwing the iPad or throwing the remote, kids throw a lot of things, then we need to say, okay, we're going to practice more and more of limiting iPad time. So the way that I would actually roll this out is, hey, I know it can be hard when you're on your iPad to know how much time is left. And so I got this little time timer for you so you can see, and I would get one of those time timers. They're like less than $10 on Amazon, and you don't have to get the time timer brand. You can get any old timer that is a visual clock, and I'm going to set it right here so that you can see it. And I'm going to come in a couple times, just reference here's how much time you have left. And then we're going to practice over and over again how it goes with transitioning off of the iPad, off of the screens. And when we get good at that, then we can say, hey, it's much more pleasant now when you are able to come down from screens. And when we turn screens off and then we move on, it feels a lot better. Remember how in the past you used to get really upset and you used to throw your iPad? I bet that didn't feel very good. And now when I say, okay, time's up, you just move on and you go play. And so I would start with something like that. Here's the boundary. We're going to approach it intentionally. We're going to do this for a week or two straight without asking all of the other demands that we could put upon the child. And then we're going to move on to the next thing when we've gotten some skills built up, when we've learned, when we've grown in that area. Now, when it comes to control, I would really, for this 6-year-old, give them some specific areas where they have control, because kids like to be in control, and obviously this child in particular likes to be in control, as most kids do. And so I would pick some areas where she's in charge. It can be personal choice decisions like what we're wearing or what shoes we're putting on or what time we're brushing our teeth, something along those lines. And I would also give her some control over the household in ways that are helpful to you, but also give her a sense of accomplishment. So this might look like unloading the dishwasher. Our 6-year-old unloads the dishwasher. I don't have to remind her or nag her to do it. I do have to say sometimes like, hey, can you come empty the dishwasher? Or I'll say, hey, do you want to empty the dishwasher now? I can see that you're playing with your sister. Or do you want to do it in 5 minutes? That's giving control. That is also helping teach them that they have an important role in the household and that we need them. And so this is something when it comes to like chores and tasks around the house that I really focus on, because when you can get your child to help, not only does it help you, but it helps them to grow some self-mastery, some self-control, some I'm doing important things, I'm contributing. And so I would pick things that you actually need. Picking up is a common thing that people often turn to. Kids don't like to pick up their toys. Give them something outside of that when we're trying to build this skill, whether it's emptying the dishwasher, whether it's sweeping, whether it's filling the dog bowls, whether it's moving the laundry from the washer to the dryer. Stretch them outside of their comfort zone just a little bit with your support so that they feel that, hey, this is important. This is something that mom and dad do on a regular basis, and they ask me to help. And that gives them a sense of control. That gives them a sense of autonomy. That gives them a sense of belonging and contribution. And so those are the places that I would start. Now, for this child that has ADHD as well, I think it is really important to acknowledge that especially after a long day where maybe they've been holding it together all day, they are going to have a more difficult time winding down after school. They are more commonly going to have issues with restraint collapse, where basically I've held it together all day, I've listened as best I could, I've done what people have been telling me, I just need a little bit of time to not be told what to do. And I think all of us need that from time to time, especially after a long day. But children with ADHD in particular need that. And so I would be focusing with this child with ADHD and separation anxiety on making sure that they feel understood, supported, connected, and then having those boundaries, because there is a comfort in having boundaries upon what we do. The question of medications comes up, and I don't know anything about this child, so I don't like to jump to, oh yeah, they have ADHD, they need medicines. That's not my approach whatsoever. But I do know a lot of children, if they're significantly struggling with ADHD, which is not just the hyperactivity or inattention, but also the emotional dysregulation and also the executive functioning challenges, sometimes medications can be really helpful to give them the scaffolding and support that they can continue through the day. They have more self-confidence at school because they're staying on task and they're able to do the things that they need to do, and it doesn't feel like that constant, I'm running a marathon and I'm just going to collapse at the end of the marathon. So I think that's an important discussion to have, and something to monitor over time with the child. I don't think that's like you have to do medications. I would definitely put all those other building blocks in place first before saying we need to turn to medications. But I do see a lot of children, once we've done those other things, when it comes to sleep, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to screens, when it comes to building up their spirit and their self-confidence, that do benefit when medications are on board to have more emotional regulation, to have more executive functioning. It's not cheating. It's not like, I always equate it with an asthmatic. If I'm an asthmatic and, I'm having trouble breathing, you don't just tell an asthmatic to breathe harder. And you shouldn't just tell a child with ADHD to brain harder. Like, they're bringing what they can, and so we're going to support them in the different ways. For the asthmatic, we're going to try and reduce and eliminate environmental triggers. For the asthmatic, we're going to make sure that they're getting good rest and good nutrition to support their lungs. And then sometimes for the asthmatic, we'll use medications in the acute sense of like they're having an asthma flare, and sometimes in the chronic sense of we need to tone down their lung hyperreactivity so that they can breathe easily and do all the important things and exercise and enjoy life. And so that's kind of my approach when it comes to ADHD and medication. Hopefully this has been helpful. I was a little more long-winded than I intended. I had written just this one sticky note and kind of went on and on. If you have questions, dearparents.substack.com is the place to find my question and answer threads and get your questions answered.